The insult landed like a slap across the face of the entire arena. Chuck Norris is a museum piece. Time to take him off the wall and show he's long past his prime. Steven Seagal let the words hang, his voice still echoing faintly through the PA system. For a single breath, silence lingered, heavy and stunned. Then the crowd detonated. One half howled with laughter, stomping, clapping, whistling approval. The other half booed with raw fury, voices cracking as they shouted, "No way!" The sound wasn't just noise. It was violent, clashing currents ripping through the same body of people. The cameras hunted for faces in that storm. They found them. A teenager in the front row doubled over, screaming with laughter. A gray-haired veteran shaking his head in disgust. A middle-aged woman cupping her hands to her mouth, shouting herself hoarse. One older man pressed both palms to his temples as if trying to push Seagal's words out of his skull. On the giant screen above the ring, Seagal's face loomed larger than life. He didn't look rattled. He didn't even look smug. He looked nourished. He tilted his head back slightly, closed his eyes, and drew in a long breath through his nose, as though inhaling the chaos itself. When he exhaled, his lips twitched upward. Every boo was a gift. Every laugh was fuel. The ring was a furnace. White spotlights slammed down like hammers, casting sharp shadows from the ropes, bouncing off the canvas until the whole stage glared back at the audience. The heat of those lamps drifted downward, mixing with the smell of stale popcorn, spilled beer, sweat, and the faint tang of metal from the steel trusses overhead. Producers in the broadcast truck were barking over headsets. "Stay tight on Seagal. Hold the shot. He's milking it," one voice insisted. Millions watching at home didn't just hear the insult. They felt shoved into choosing a side. Seagal stretched his arms out wide as if blessing the uproar. His black silk shirt gleamed in the light, fabric sticking slightly to his frame. He moved with slow precision, pacing from corner to corner, measured steps like a predator comfortable in its cage. His mouth moved at times, shaping words too soft for microphones, but the curl of his lips made the message obvious. Mockery, disdain, contempt. The noise surged and dipped in waves. One moment, deafening, the next strangled by pockets of silence before exploding again. The crowd wasn't a crowd anymore. It was a living organism, spasming uncontrollably. What cut deepest wasn't just what he'd said. It was who he'd said it about. Chuck Norris wasn't present, yet his name saturated the air. He was a myth layered into people's lives. Saturday nights in front of boxy televisions, VHS tapes worn thin, kids imitating kicks in their backyards. Fathers and sons who once bonded over his movies now sat together in the stands, listening to that name dragged across the floor. It felt like hearing a family member mocked. And the man himself? Absent. That absence was louder than anything Seagal could say. Every second without him widened the void. Seagal prowled in that void deliberately. Each time he stopped pacing, he raised his chin slightly, squinting toward the entrance tunnel, as if to ask, "Where is your hero? Where is the relic you worship?" The cameras followed his gaze, lingering on the dark tunnel as though something might emerge. Nothing did. When he spoke again, his tone dropped lower, but the microphones caught it clean. "Strength doesn't live in old jokes or dusty posters," he said. "It doesn't live in bedtime stories you tell your kids. If Norris is all you've got, then all you've got is memory. And memory doesn't hit back." The words stabbed deeper than the first insult. Cups flew onto the canvas. A young man in the lower section tried to climb the barricade before security dragged him down. In the rafters, A chant broke loose. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Sloppy at first, then louder, spreading like fire leaping across dry grass. The name gained weight with every repetition until the whole building seemed to vibrate with it. Still, the ring belonged to Seagal. Alone in the center, he rotated slowly, soaking in both the hatred and the pleading. He stopped pacing. He raised one hand. Not a fist, just a flat palm, steady in the spotlight. The chant faltered, voices colliding into each other before tapering off. Against their own instincts, thousands obeyed, waiting to hear. Seagal leaned toward the nearest camera, his eyes sharp, his voice sharpened to a razor's edge. "Your myth is afraid of me." The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It fell heavy, suffocating, forcing people to confront the possibility that he might be right. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, the lights flickered. Not a dim fade, but a violent, electric shudder. The arena gasped in unison, just wondering, "Where are you watching from?" "Write it down, bellow." The blackout wasn't elegant. It was a violent snuffing out, the kind that makes your eyes ache because they've been spoiled by too much light. 1 second, the ring was a stage carved from white fire. The next, it was a swallowed whole. The crowd's first instinct wasn't to scream, but to gasp. One long inhalation dragged from 20,000 lungs at once. A few phones flickered to life, little squares of blue trembling like a scattered constellation. Somewhere high above, a relay snapped with a dry metallic pop. The sound was small, almost delicate, but in that silence it seemed to echo. And then Seagal's voice cut through the dark, softer now, more intimate for the lack of vision. "Don't bother," he said. "Don't look for him. He's not coming." Myths don't walk down tunnels. Memes don't climb into rings. The words, unanchored from his body, seemed to creep from every direction at once. Children whimpered. A man cursed under his breath. Even those who hated Seagal felt the shiver of being cornered in the dark with him. Then it came. A single chord, sharp and metallic, stabbing into the silence. The sound was neither triumphant nor nostalgic. It was surgical, a blade slicing through the fog. Blue-white light burst outward in cold beams, washing the arena in a color that felt unnatural after all that glaring heat. For 3 heartbeats, the giant screens above the ring stayed black. Cameras searched desperately, but the production crew held them back, letting the light do the talking. He appeared at the tunnel's mouth with no fanfare to cushion him, no entourage, no dramatic robe or glittering pyrotechnics. Jeans, scuffed boots, a plain, zippered jacket. He walked with a rhythm so calm it almost disoriented the crowd after the bombast they had endured. Each step was measured, unhurried, as if he had been walking that corridor his entire life, and nothing at the end could surprise him. Chuck Norris. The name wasn't announced, but it didn't need to be. The audience recognized him not just with their eyes, but with their entire bodies. A reflex born of decades of familiarity. It spread in waves. First the sharp inhale, then the spontaneous applause, then the shouts that cracked into sobs. A man in the front row clutched his chest like he'd been reunited with an old friend who had vanished for years. 2 seats away, a woman wept openly, makeup running down her cheeks, and clapped so hard her rings clicked together. On the canvas, Seagal's pacing stopped. He turned to face the tunnel. For the first time, his movements weren't leisurely. They were abrupt, defensive, like a dog hearing a key turn in the door. The cameras finally found Norris's face. It wasn't frozen in time. It wasn't painted with nostalgia. His eyes carried age, sharp and unvarnished, the kind of gaze that no longer asked to be believed. The lines around them were etched deep, the beard trimmed short, his expression flat but alive. No grin, no nod to the crowd, just an unbroken stare at the man who had tried to erase him with words. He walked forward. Each step tightened the chants. What had been sloppy, scattered cries of "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" grew disciplined, unified. The sound wasn't simply loud anymore, it had shape, like a drumline marching toward battle. The higher the volume climbed, the slower Norris seemed to move, as though the arena itself was elongating his journey to make the anticipation unbearable. The director's voice cracked through the broadcast truck. Stay wide, tunnel and crowd in frame. Now cut to Seagal. Catch that face. He's sweating. Screens flickered between the icon's approach and the provoker's mask. In one box, tears. In another, smirks. Every camera fed the narrative. This was no longer a fight. It was a collision between a living legend and the man who dared to spit on memory. Norris reached the apron and stopped. He didn't soak in the ovation like a performer. He studied the ring. The ropes taped gray from use. The canvas dulled with stains invisible to cameras, but visible to him. He touched the bottom rope with his fingertips before climbing in. An old habit, respect disguised as ritual. Inside, Seagal twitched. It wasn't big, a fraction of a flinch, but the lens magnified it. His grin stayed, but his eyes betrayed the recalculation. He wasn't pacing now. He was rooted, chin high, arms loose but not relaxed. The cameras drank it in, feeding the suspicion that his confidence had seams. The crowd smelled it. They surged louder, not simply in support of Norris, but in attack against Seagal. Their voices shoved him backward without hands. It was an atmosphere assault, and Seagal had no defense against it. He tried words. I meant every syllable, he said, voice straining for calm. All that's left of you is reruns and jokes. This is live. No edits. Norris waited, letting the line hang until it turned stale in the air. Then he gave his answer, quiet, unembellished. Your words are cheap. Let's see if you've got the guts to prove them. The sentence detonated. The roof rattled with the roar. A man punched the air and missed his friend's shoulder by inches. In the balcony, someone screamed until their voice broke. Security guards grinned despite themselves. Seagal rolled his shoulders, trying to coat his hesitation in ceremony. He spun his wrists, flexed his stance. All theater meant to declare control. But up close, it read, desperate, over-polished, too much gloss on a cracked surface. Norris stepped closer. Not fast, not aggressive, just closer. The referee slid between them with a hand raised as if to remind both men that rules still existed, but neither looked at him. The ring lights dimmed one notch, isolating the square into a stage of its own. The rest of the arena blurred. Seagal lifted 2 fingers and tapped his sternum. Right here, he said, loud enough for microphones to catch. A ripple of laughter crawled through the audience. They had seen this show before. Norris's eyes flicked down once to Seagal's hips, registering weight set too far back, shoulders pretending to be stronger than they were, and then came back up, cold. His reply was silence. The crowd devoured it, knowing silence from him meant more than 1,000 boasts. And then, as the tension became unbearable, Norris spoke again, low and cutting. I gave you time to think. Use it. The grin on Seagal's face faltered for a heartbeat, enough for the crowd to smell blood. Even before the bell, even before the first clash, they leaned forward as one body. The myth had walked into the ring, and the fight was no longer theoretical. The ring felt smaller now, compressed by the weight of 2 men who had not yet truly touched each other. Heat pressed down from the lamps, The air smelled of sweat, iron, and something sour from spilled beer soaking into the boards beneath the canvas. 20,000 eyes pinned them into place. But inside those ropes, it was strangely quiet, like standing inside a bell that had just been struck. Seagal broke first. He had to. Stillness didn't suit him. He threw his arms wide, grinned too broadly, then snapped into a demonstration. A sharp back fist to nowhere, a forearm slash that cracked the air, a heel pivot that screamed, "Look at me." His breath hissed loud enough for the microphones to catch. The crowd responded with an uneven mixture of whistles, laughs, and boos. It was theater, and they knew it. Norris didn't budge. His arms hung loose, hands open, breathing shallow. His eyes didn't track fists, but hips, shoulders, weight shifts. He wasn't fighting Seagal's body. He was reading its grammar. The patience was suffocating. Seagal tried to close the gap with aggression. A fist flashed toward Norris's cheek, loud more than dangerous. Norris shifted his head a fraction. The glove cut air with a whistle and missed. Norris's hands stayed down, posture unchanged, as if the attack hadn't even happened. The crowd felt the difference. Noise drained into a long, drawn-out ooh. They weren't watching violence. They were watching dissection. Seagal reset with bigger gestures, a sweeping hook aimed at the ribs, a pivot to trap. Norris didn't retreat. He rotated half an inch, letting the strike skim fabric instead of flesh. The elbow that followed clashed with nothing. Seagal looked like a man trying to punch smoke. He snarled words to fill the space. "You gonna stand there all night?" They hit the air like coins tossed into a fountain. Loud at first, forgotten seconds later. A kick lashed high, theatrical, clean for the cameras. Norris's weight shifted back, and the boot hung in empty space. The crowd murmured differently now. Less outrage, more unease. This wasn't the fight they thought they had come to see. Norris stepped left into a blind angle, not striking, not countering, just occupying. It was a reminder. I can be here whenever I choose. The crowd roared at the subtlety, sensing Seagal's jaw tighten, his patience eroding. Seagal escalated. He launched a flurry, jab, jab, back fist, palm heel feint. His shoulders hunted speed his hips couldn't deliver. Norris moved as though space itself bent for him. Chin tucking, ankle turning, weight slipping half an inch beyond reach. Strikes carved arcs through emptiness. The microphones picked up odd sounds, a vendor's tray rattling, a cough in the mezzanine, louder than the mist blows. It was humiliation in high definition. Finally, Seagal clipped something. A stab at the thigh, low and fast, landed meat on meat. The thud drew cheers. Seagal's eyes lit with the spark of contact. He pressed forward, hungry. Norris gave him nothing. His first real touch was a hand brushing Seagal's wrist, so light it looked accidental. But it collapsed the line of power from shoulder to fist, leaving the next punch to stumble half dead. Seagal's balance wobbled. The crowd caught it, the noise sharp and predatory. "Fight me!" Seagal barked, volume cracking. Sweat shone at his temples, bright under the lights. His grin returned, brittle now, stretching too thin over nerves. Norris finally moved forward. Not a strike, a step, just closer. Enough that Seagal could feel breath on his face, the heat of another body invading his range. Seagal's reach, his pride, shrank instantly. The crowd exploded, recognizing dominance in silence. Seagal lashed out in panic-drenched fury. A hammering combo, right, left, ridge hand, elbow. Norris slipped like water through cracks, shoulders rolling, head turning just enough. At one point his boot landed on Seagal's toe and lifted off again in the same breath, a ghost touch that unbalanced him further. invisible to most, devastating to Seagal's confidence. The referee twitched forward, then stopped. He knew better than to step into this kind of current. Seagal roared again, charging with a straight, followed by a hooking back fist. Norris bent at the waist, pivoted, and let the strikes carve through air that no longer belonged to him. A brush of triceps redirected Seagal past the target, leaving him facing ropes instead of legend. The silence that followed was awful, the kind that makes a crowd hesitate to breathe. They had just watched a man swing with everything and touch nothing. Seagal spun back, jaw clenched, chest heaving. His voice cracked into the mic as he screamed, "You're not even fighting!" The words ricocheted off the ropes and died. Norris lifted his gaze, steady, unhurried. Then, for the first time, he stepped forward with intent. The crowd surged with him, 20,000 bodies leaning as one. The atmosphere snapped taut. Every heart braced for the first collision that would not be avoided. Seagal tried to keep the ring his stage by sheer force of voice. He jabbed a finger at Norris, pacing tight circles, spitting syllables like nails. "You see? He's afraid even to lift a hand," he shouted, turning so the upper decks could hear him. The microphone picked up every ounce of strain in his throat. The words didn't land the way he needed. A ripple of laughter crawled through the stands, not at Norris, but at him. At first it was faint, tucked between boos and chants. But then it spread. By the time it reached the mid-bowl, the chuckling had grown into a rolling wave. It wasn't the audience he had envisioned, not gasps of awe, but people smirking, pointing, telling each other, "He looks desperate." The more he barked, the smaller he looked. Arms swinging, chest heaving, eyes darting. He was trying to dominate with volume, and the crowd was turning his roar into a punchline. Norris hadn't moved. His stillness grew heavier by the second. He stood like a wall no storm could budge, his hands loose, his breathing calm, his gaze steady and unreadable. That patience was a knife Seagal couldn't see until it was already cutting. Then it came. Norris's first answer. Not a flurry, not a declaration, just a single, short strike. His fist traveled no farther than a handshake, a compact line from shoulder to sternum. The sound was honest and sharp, knuckles knocking bone with the authority of truth. Seagal staggered. Only half a step, but enough. His balance buckled. His weight dropped back onto his heels. His mouth stayed open mid-insult, as if he'd forgotten what word he was about to deliver. The arena erupted. Seats slammed up as people rose together, beer spraying into lights, popcorn bags bursting under stomping feet. The camera operators caught the aftermath. A boy's eyes wide with disbelief. A woman clapping until her hands reddened. An older man grinning so hard, tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. Seagal recoiled, then flung his arms wide, trying to paint over the stumble. "Lucky touch!" he shouted, voice cracking with the strain of forced bravado. But the crowd had already chosen its story. The chant began again, harder, unified. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The rhythm pounded against the canvas like a second heartbeat. Seagal lunged with fresh fury. A wild hook, a ridge hand slash, a flailing elbow. He wanted impact, any impact, to erase the memory of that one strike. Norris answered with restraint that looked crueler than any counter. A slip by an inch. A shoulder that angled him offline. A soft tap at Seagal's wrist that turned a punch into dead weight. Every missed swing deepened the wound. He kept shouting to mask it. "Stand and fight!" he barked, but it sounded less like command and more like plea. The microphones exposed the higher pitch, edging into his voice. From the rafters, a woman cupped her hands and yelled back, "Stop talking, Stephen!" The whole section laughed, and Seagal's face tightened like leather pulled too far. Norris closed distance deliberately. No hurry, no wasted step. Up close, Seagal could smell the detergent in his jacket. The faint metallic tang of spotlight heat caught in the fabric. Norris reached with 2 fingers and brushed Seagal's forearm. Nothing brutal, just a surgeon's correction. The punch collapsed before it left the chamber. Seagal blinked in disbelief. Then another touch. A check hook so compact the cameras nearly missed it, clipping the edge of Seagal's jaw. His head snapped a fraction, his feet shuffled into each other. Gasps turned to howls. The chant broke into applause, then laughter, then fused again into a roar that rattled the arena's steel beams. Seagal tried to smother panic with aggression. He threw a combination that had no rhythm. Right, left, spinning backhand, stomp. All muscle memory in freefall. Norris dismantled it with surgical indifference. A pivot here, a slip there, a palm redirecting at the triceps, a heel nudge that stole footing. Every move was so minimal it looked effortless, and that effortlessness was humiliation. The ref stepped forward once, hand half raised, then thought better of it. The fight had tipped into something psychological, and rules couldn't help. The crowd laughed louder. Laughter mixed with cheers, the most dangerous sound for a man like Seagal. Every missed strike became a joke told at his expense. He could hear it now, the crueler rhythm of mockery cutting through his lungs harder than any punch. His face flushed crimson under the lights. Sweat gathered at his temples, shining bright for the cameras. His mouth worked, but no words came. What did escape were grunts and ragged breaths, raw and animal. Norris answered with silence. His chest rose evenly, calm as if the storm weren't touching him at all. He let Seagal burn himself out, let the arena's voices chew through what pride remained. Then he stepped forward again, the smallest move. The crowd felt it as a seismic shift. People leaned forward in their seats, phones lifted high, screams colliding into each other. The building itself seemed to tilt toward Norris. Seagal, furious, abandoned form completely. He charged, fists flailing, shoulders rolling, breath tearing through his mouth. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was chasing. And everyone in that building knew what that meant. He had already lost the battle that mattered most. Seagal reached for the only move he trusted to save him. His body coiled, jaw locked, eyes narrowing with the familiar rhythm of a throw he had rehearsed into legend. He dipped, stepped inside, hands shooting for Norris's frame, hips twisting to pull him into orbit. For a second, the geometry looked right, the form crisp. Cameras zoomed tight, commentators leaned forward, the crowd's roar thinned into a single sharp breath. This was his chance. He turned, committed, and for a heartbeat, Norris seemed caught. Seagal's shoulder pressed against him, the leverage set. The arena waited for the arc of a body leaving the ground. Someone screamed, "Finish him!" Phones snapped upward, red lights blinking record. But Norris didn't resist. He traveled with it. He shifted just a half beat longer than Seagal expected, his foot tracing a small crescent, his hand floating to the triceps. He stretched the movement past its breaking point. The momentum Seagal created looped back on him. Norris didn't counter with muscle, only with refusal to be where the trap ended. Seagal's balance flipped. His chest lost the fulcrum it needed. In a blink, the technique turned inward, throwing its owner. His feet left the mat, not with grace, but betrayal. He hit the canvas flat, the sound booming through the arena like a door slammed in a concrete hallway. The crowd erupted. Seats banged upright as thousands jumped to their feet, screams colliding with laughter and disbelief. "This is over!" a voice thundered, picked up and echoed from section to section. The big screens replayed the fall from 3 angles, each time the impact sounding heavier. On the mat, Seagal curled, then tried to rise. His hands betrayed him, trembling, refusing to hold steady. He planted a palm, and his wrist buckled. Sweat pooled at his temples, his breathing ragged and loud enough for microphones to catch. Norris didn't follow up. He stood a stride away, balanced, still. One foot near Seagal's hip, the other grounded, his eyes fixed. No cruelty in them, no rush, just authority. The silence he created weighed more than any punch. The crowd, reading it, shifted from chaos to reverence. Cheers softened into rhythmic clapping, then a hum that prickled skin. People leaned forward, whispering to each other, "He won't hit him. He doesn't need to." The referee edged closer. Norris shook his head once. The ref froze. The fight was no longer about rules. Seagal pushed again, jaw clenched, arms trembling. He rose halfway, eyes finding Norris above him, steady and silent. That silence felt like judgment. The arena hushed, waiting for his next mistake. He swung, wild, sloppy, more protest than strike. Norris caught the wrist with 2 fingers, redirected it gently, and let Seagal collapse back to the mat. Gasps surged, then applause, louder than before. It wasn't violence they were cheering, but control. Seagal rolled to his side, eyes darting for the ropes. He reached for the bottom strand, missed, and his hand shook in the air before he pulled it back, ashamed of the tremor. The big screen magnified his face, showing the cracks, anger, embarrassment, fear. Norris still said nothing. He let the quiet do the work. Around them, the crowd clapped in rhythm, slower, heavier, a verdict without words. From high in the rafters, a man shouted, "He's done!" The words stuck, repeated across sections until they became truth. Seagal heard them. He forced himself up again, staggering, fists raised in a parody of guard. He threw a jab that had no intent. Norris slipped inside and simply stood close enough that Seagal could feel the calm of his breathing. "Come on," Seagal rasped, his voice breaking. The microphone carried it across the arena. People leaned in, waiting. Norris didn't answer. He didn't need to. He took half a step back, opening space that wasn't an escape, but an invitation. Choose your ending. The crowd sensed it. Phones tilted higher. The chant rebuilt. Chuck! 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 Each beat heavier, slower, inevitable. Seagal lifted his shoulders for another attack, but his hands betrayed him again. They shook so violently, his glove tapped the canvas like a broken metronome. The sound carried in the silence. 20,000 people heard it. And in that moment, everyone knew. The fight's finish was no longer about fists. It was about how Steven Seagal would face the truth already standing over him. The referee moved first, stepping toward Seagal with one hand raised. Norris stopped him with a small shake of the head. No words, no gesture for cameras, just refusal. This ending had to come from Seagal himself. The crowd sensed it immediately. They hushed, leaning forward, phones lifted. Everyone waited to see whether Seagal would stand or stay folded into the mat and let silence finish him. His chest heaved. Hands trembled as he pushed up again, face red with effort. He rose to one knee, then his feet, staggering, fists raised in a broken parody of readiness. "I'm not finished," he rasped. The arena heard only because it was so quiet. He swung, clumsy, heavy, more protest than strike. Norris met it like a teacher correcting a student. A single parry turned the punch aside. A controlled push sent Seagal back to the canvas. He landed seated, blinking, disbelief scrawled across his face. The crowd erupted. Applause crashed like waves. Some screamed, some laughed, some cried. Cameras caught strangers hugging, a man in uniform saluting the ring. Norris didn't gloat. He stood steady, gaze fixed on Seagal. His silence filled the building more completely than any shout. Seagal tried again, dragging himself upright. He made it halfway before his elbows gave out. He fell back, sweat dripping, chest rattling. The audience hushed. The cameras caught his face. Pride cracking into anger, then shame. Norris stepped closer, but didn't strike. He simply waited, eyes steady, letting Seagal face himself. The referee bent forward for permission again. Norris shook his head once more. No announcement. The lesson was visible already. Seagal forced one last attempt. He rose, gloves shaking, hurled a wild hook. Norris slipped, caught the arm, and guided him down again with effortless precision. No violence, no malice, just inevitability. Seagal collapsed, staring at the lights above. The arena exploded. People stomped, clapped, screamed. The chant rolled, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Some stood in stunned silence, hands pressed to their mouths. Only then did Norris speak. His voice was low, but it carried because every ear strained. Loud words are cheap. Real strength lives in silence. The line detonated. Tears streaked faces. Applause roared. Strangers high-fived. Cameras swept across rows of people who would tell this story for years. On the mat, Seagal sat hunched, eyes down. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Norris. His bowed head was defeat enough. Norris turned once toward the audience, gave a single nod, then stepped back, leaving the ring to his beaten rival. The ovation rose higher, rolling in waves long after. The myth lived again, not in muscle, but in control.